can we imagine, in context of misinformation, in a world where augmented reality technology is more heavily deployed, looked at how various groups are weaponizing social media, et cetera. And that is what led us to this. So we know, anybody know who this is? Okay, a few, raise your hand if you know who this is, okay? Only a few of you see it. So this is Lil Michaela. She is a huge star on Instagram. How many followers does she have? Anybody? So well more than 1 million. I don't know exactly how many at this point, but she's not real, okay? So she's a synthetic character who is risen to fame. And I think she's a canary in a coal mine, a harbinger of future synthetic celebrities that are going to emerge. So we're going to talk in this debate a little bit about Lil, but we'll also talk about what happens when we see misinformation using these techniques. And so we'll see that. And of course, I just refer here to the QAnon conspiracy theory, which has led a variety of people to contemplate violence over the last little bit before, thankfully, Reddit decided to pull this off of its pages. I think that that's a good place for me to introduce Manoush. Some of you are back in the room now. Manoush Zomorodi, who I think this is the third time she's been part of our summit. Some of you will know her from her time at WNYC, where she hosted Note to Self and ran campaigns looking at the implications of media for us personally, things like Bored and Brilliant. And she is now a startup founder at Stable Genius Productions. I don't know where she got that name. And she's going to tell you a little bit more about that, I think, as we get started. But I'm going to welcome Manoush, who is in turn going to welcome our brilliant debaters. So Manoush. Yes.
Where do you want me to sit, man?
Right in the middle.
Oh, I get to go in the middle. Hey,
yes.
Everybody. I hear that everyone's still into the snacks. So I congratulate you on your self-control and your ability to come back to learn and have some fun. So this is supposed to be super intense. This is the great synthetic media debate.
Really?
And our proposition is, are you ready? Do you remember the proposition? Our proposition is synthetic media will do more good than harm. What is synthetic media, maybe you're wondering? Well, from holographic pop stars to new tools that automate workflows, from deep learning techniques used to pump out news articles, to highly engaging AI characters, the potential for synthetic media is enormous. And yet, the dangers are also extraordinary. It wouldn't be a debate, right, if that wasn't the case. Okay, so these same tools we know can be put to work for the purposes of misinformation and propaganda. Their very existence may mean that the public begins to doubt the veracity of documented evidence. As a journalist, that is extremely concerning to me. And of course, in a midterm election year with 2020 hindsight on the presidential election in 2016, we don't need reminding of those dangers. But as Justin said, the point here is not to have a simplistic, tech is good, no, it's bad argument, because that's not why we come to these things, right? We know that there's a lot of nuance, there are many, many complexities to how technology affects our society in the ways that it gets implemented. And so we are, though, going to ask you at the end which side you most agree with. So think carefully, not just how your gut feels, right, but the evidence that these two extremely prepped teams will present to you on stage here today. So, representing the team for the proposition, arguing that synthetic media will do more good than harm, we have Ken Perlin and Eli Pariser. Big round of applause. We gotta pump this crowd up. You guys, I wanna hear hooting and hollering. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so Ken is a professor of computer science at NYU, where he directs the Future Reality Lab, exploring virtual and augmented reality, computer graphics and animation, user interfaces, and education. He is chief scientist at 2 startups, Tectonic Technologies and HoloJam. And this is the coolest fact about you. You got an Academy Award, dude, for noise and turbulence procedural texturing techniques, which is used in movies all the time. So cool. All right, Eli, you've heard of the filter bubble, right? this is the guy who came up with that. He wrote a book. He introduced it to your lexicon. He's an Omidyar Fellow at the New America Foundation, where he is working right now on how to get technology and media to serve democracy. Thank you for doing that. At 23 years old, he was named executive director of MoveOn.org, and later he co-founded the global activism site Avaz. And in 2012, he co-founded Upworthy, that mission-driven media company designed to make civically important ideas popular. All right, representing the against the proposition, arguing synthetic media will do more harm than good, we have Karen Kornbluh and Matt Hartman. Apologies. Oh, I see your tactics here.
You're positive.
Ambassador Karen Kornbluh is the Senior Fellow for Digital Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations and serves as governor on the U.S. Broadcasting Board of Governors. Previously, she was U.S. Ambassador to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Before that, she served as Barack Obama's Senate Policy Director. And your cool fact, you wrote, I mean, multiple cool facts, obviously, but you wrote the 2008 Democratic Party platform. So she's a little formidable, you guys, putting it out there. And you also were at Nielsen, where you founded the Nielsen Foundation. Okay.
Can I switch to her side?
Yeah, I know, right? Matt Hartman, last but not least, he is a partner at Betaworks Ventures. Before Betaworks, Matt built ReferBoost and was at the social consumer app Hot Potato, which was acquired by Facebook. Your cool statement, he is the inventor of patent 8189781, which is, I mean, says it all, really. Related to the protection of digital images. He studied cognitive science and computer science at the University of Pennsylvania and has an MBA from Kellogg. And let's just do this, you guys. Each of our debaters has 3 minutes to present their opening statement. And first up is going to be Eli, who is debating for the proposition.
All right.
Oh, there's nowhere for you to go. I'm sorry. I thought there was like a podium, but you're going to sit next to me.
I'm just going to sit
here.
So, Ms. Moderator,
yes.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I come today with a simple message. As a society, we've made a horrible mistake. Not just Trump, but a different mistake. And the synthetic media actually offers us the way to fix it. So I'm not going to argue that synthetic media doesn't creep me out. For the record, totally creeps me out. I find it disturbing. But I actually want to argue that this fact could be our salvation. See, in the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was God. And the great thing about the Word was someone had to speak it. Words don't naturally occur. Words come with a speaker or an author. And then along came the mechanically reproduced image, the photo. And here's where we went horribly wrong. We allowed ourselves to believe that images capture reality in some objective sense. We allowed ourselves to believe that because a machine was involved, that the image was more truthful. But are they? I brought some exhibits. So, exhibit number 1, here's a beautiful luxury home with a pool from an Airbnb-style service. I should be careful to say this image hasn't been doctored in any way. So here's another undoctored image of the same house. Next slide, please. So, is the first image true? It wasn't manipulated, but it's not exactly accurate either. Okay, here's another example. Here's a picture posted by a Fox channel of the riots in Baltimore a few years ago. Again, totally not doctored, but there was one problem, which is that this is an image of Caracas, not of Baltimore.
Wow.
So they apologized. But again, not a doctored image, but leads people to believe something about the world that was totally false. And when we start talking about moving images, things get way more problematic. So I want to show you just a small piece of a news report, and then I'll show you the footage that it was based on. So here's the news report this actually ran.
No, I'm not scared of nothing.
When you get older, you gonna stay away from all these guns?
No.
No?
No.
What do you want to do when you get older?
I'm gonna have me a gun?
Because I live right here and I don't want none of my family members to get shot.
That is very scary indeed. So far, no suspects are in custody.
Well, that's what I like to hear. You ain't scared of nothing. Damn. When you get older, you gonna stay away from all these guns?
No.
No?
No.
What do you want to do when you get older?
I'm gonna have me a gun.
You are? Why you want to do that? You know what happens when
I'm gonna be the police.
Okay, well then you can have.
So they cut off the part where he says, I'm going to be the police. So again, this isn't doctored imagery, but just by choosing where to start and end the clip, you've radically changed the meaning of this image. Yet when people see it on the news, people tend to believe, well, this says something about what is real and true in the world. And that's just an unedited piece of tape. By the way, is the timer?
Yeah, you got 10 more seconds.
Oh, great, okay. So all media is synthetic, I want to argue. All media has an author. And in a way, words are more truthful than images. But we've allowed conventions that divorce the authorship of images and video and audio from who actually made them. And that's led us astray. So what I want to argue is synthetic media is going to call these questions. And yes, we're going to go through an uncanny valley and a period where people adjust. But if it leads us to question whether images and mechanically reproduced media say something about the truth in the world, that would be a really good thing. That would be a really positive thing in society.
Okay, arguing against the proposition, Matthew Hartman of Betaworks. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, and I don't know where the thing is, but the question you're being asked to judge is, will synthetic media do more good than harm? We argue that the good will not outweigh the harm. I'll start by sharing 2 examples of synthetic media, and then I will show you why this is different from all other kind of technology innovation. So if I can show the first example, and you can press play, or if you advance it once. So this is Wonder Woman, not synthetic media. Show the next slide, please. That's a picture of me. Also not synthetic, that's a selfie I took. Using just this photo, 1 data point. Can you please advance the next slide? We now have the technology, and press 1 more so we can see it moving around, where we can graft my face onto Wonder Woman. This is synthetic media. It is forged video, and it's fun, right? This is entertaining to watch. But you can also do this, and if you could just play the first 10 seconds or so of the next one.
So Belgium, don't be a hypocrite. Withdraw from the climate agreement.
That's fine. So most innovation starts out driven by a mission, and the harm is the unintended consequence. Facebook's mission was to connect all of us, and it was an unintended consequence that the algorithmic feed has turned out to have some downsides. The iPhone was intended to put a supercomputer in our pocket. An unintended consequence is that we don't look up from our phones as much. It's harder to disconnect. There are always good and bad use cases of technology, but the general trend has been net positive. Synthetic media is different. Its purpose is to create forged video. It's being built as an academic exercise whose only goal is to figure out whether it's possible. There is no larger mission. And while academics and engineers struggle to find the positive use cases for what they've built, the negative use cases are clear. The stakes could not be higher for our democracy and for international diplomacy. So we shouldn't be surprised when we weigh the costs and the benefits and find that synthetic media has not done enough to outweigh the harm that it creates.
Thank you 40 seconds left.
Wow.
I cede my time.
Oh,
I don't know. I think that's
fine. Okay.
I'll reserve my time. I don't know how those rules work.
I don't really either, so we're just doing the best we
All
can
right.
here. All right, next up is Ken Perlin, who is for the proposition.
Okay, all right. So there are 2 issues here that intersect, and Eli brought up one of them, and Matt brought up the other, and I'm going to tie them together. One is the question of what is synthetic media, and we all have this really clear idea in our heads, I think, at this point, but I think the problem, as Eli was suggesting, is what we consider synthetic media changes depending upon what year we're talking about it, and it's going to continue to change. There was a time when words on paper and printing were considered synthetic media. There was a time when radio, when photographs, when cinema, when the web, every new technology is like, we've never seen that before. I don't know what that is. That isn't, and even theater, that's not Hamlet, that's just a guy playing Hamlet. He's not even speaking Danish. And so each new era brings something, as you said, kind of uncanny. It's like, what is that? And you know, you show Stalin standing next to Trotsky and suddenly Trotsky disappears from the photo. And back then people were very confused. Now we understand that completely. So I think what's happening is that there is this wedge of new technologies, and at the very beginning of that wedge of new technologies, everybody freaks out because they've never seen it before, they don't know what the rules are, but then they go back eventually to what you were getting at, which is the only thing that matters is provenance, is our understanding and trust for the chain of authorship. Where did that come from? There were times in history where if you read something in a book, people would just assume that was real. There were times when if you heard something on the radio, most of you know about Orson Welles' reading of War of the Worlds, and people started fleeing their homes in panic because they didn't understand the rules of radio yet. And this is going to continue to happen with every new medium. What the examples that Matt showed, in a few years, people say, oh yeah, that's very funny, we know what that is, haha. And then some new thing will come out, probably based on these forthcoming wearables that are coming out in 5 years, and everyone will start freaking out about those until they get those. The important thing is that after we get rid of the freak out, we still have literacy. We still have words on paper. We still have movies. We still have all the positive benefits of the web and being able to create culture. So I wouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I would say, yes, we have to use it responsibly, but it's a good thing that we're always powering up, in spite of the growing pains, our collective means of communicating with each other.
Nice. 8 seconds left. That was good. Okay. And finally, last opening statements comes from Karen Kornbluh, who is arguing against the proposition.
I'm arguing against, and that's because Ken was a natural feed into what I want to say, which is those rules, the context that we've had in the past, our system of debating that is broken. And that's why I think that this synthetic media, a new media at this time, will do more harm than good. So I'm going to just tell you about being there at the beginning of the commercialization and deployment of the internet. And at that point, we thought we put in place a bunch of policies to make sure that the communications network was open. We put in place policies to make sure that the networks would not control the content of what was going across them, and it would be a technology that would give voice to the voiceless and turn everyone into a producer. And we assumed that any issues that came up along the line that posed societal challenges, we would deal with the way we had dealt with challenges in the past when radio proved to be a challenge. People were paying off disc jockeys to pretend that they were enthusiastic about their songs. A law was passed that said that you had to reveal who was paying for an ad. The public interest obligation was put in place on broadcast so that broadcasters had to air local news. Public television was created, and so on and so on. And so we just assumed that would happen if the internet developed into something that challenged democracy, challenged society. Well, that's the past. Now I want to show you what's going on now. Can I have a couple of seconds of this video?
Welcome to the Islamic State of France. Under Sharia law, you can enjoy everything the Islamic State of France has to offer, as long as you follow the rules. Enjoy the fine art featured at the Louvre. The Mona Lisa finally looks how a woman should.
You can stop it now.
See the newly renovated Notre Dame de Paris.
You can stop it. So this was an ad, believe it or not, that ran during the election. It was to a carefully targeted segment of the population in North Carolina. They ran one about, it was a pretend travel video, and it was run to people who they had tested were susceptible to believing that it was true. They ran another one about Rome, and then right before the election, LA. And they were just trying to scare people. This was one of many, many micro-targeted ads that had no disclosure based on data about people and experiments that were run on people that they were completely unaware of. They were augmented, of course, by bots. Often what the ads did was just get you to join a group, and the ad was perfectly innocent, and then you would join the group, and gradually it would become more and more radical, discouraging African Americans from voting, getting fearful white people to think that their country was, under Sharia law. This is obviously a well-honed practice. I mean, part of my argument is people are bad. There was a 1969 memo from a tobacco executive that said, doubt is our product. And corporations have been using these techniques of tricking us. The fossil fuel industry famously hacked climate scientists and leaked selective parts to cast doubt on climate change. Various groups are casting doubt on vaccines, distorting the history of the Civil War and the Holocaust, sowing fear of minority groups. A new report from Data and Society documents a coordinated network of influencers that are using YouTube to radicalize people into white nationalism. Obviously, Russia used this playbook for malign information influence operations. Oh, am I over time?
You wrap up.
Okay, I'm wrapping up. So I think we could change the future. We could mitigate all this bad stuff, but I think we've lost the will to think together as a society about technology and to make technology work for us instead of our being subject to it. And I think those with money and power are going to use it to keep manipulating us. So that's why I'm pessimistic.
Okay, thank you very much. We now proceed to the debate portion between the two teams. I'm going to ask a question to each side. I would like you to respond. Then the opposite team will have a chance to have a rebuttal, and then you'll get a chance to briefly respond to that. Kind of cool. That's how it usually works. I did some research. And then you guys will also have closing arguments, to be clear. So I want to start on the for side. Both teams have given examples of synthetic media, good versions, bad versions. But I want to ask, what suggestions do you have for how we begin to draw the line between good and bad, or creative uses versus manipulative ones? Eli, you said that you find a lot of it creepy, but how do we start to codify what is okay and what is not? Or as you both pointed out, that provenance is what matters. How do we do that?
Right. Well, I feel like this has been one of my frustrations in the discourse about fake news and misinformation. And I agree with Karen that there is a big problem there, but I think it's been misdefined. So I think from my understanding of how false beliefs are propagated, they're not always, in fact, often not propagated through things that are literally false. And so you can create a false impression using a string of things that are true that a fact checker wouldn't be able to deny are true, but that create an impression which is false. The classic trope in journalism that does this is, is so-and-so having an affair? You don't have to answer that question to create an impression that that's an open, an open question. So if we think about disinformation not as, I feel like the synthetic media debate ends up in the same place that some of this fake news stuff is, which is if we just eradicated things that were inauthentic or false, we would solve the problem. And in fact, if you look at right-wing partisan media, which has created a whole bunch of false impressions about the world, they haven't done it by saying things that are literally untrue. They've done it by creating false impressions. So going back to provenance, I think what we need is some kind of feedback loop that informs how credible different authors are, and that you build credibility over time, and that gives you reach. Right now, you get reach in exchange for popularity or sensationalism, and that's a pretty bad setup for the kind of misinformation that Karen was talking about.
Ken, do you want to add to that?
Sure. I actually think, in the context of that question, I actually think that the entire debate we're having here today could be considered harmful, in the sense that everything Karen was talking about was done in 1964 by the Lyndon Johnson campaign with the little girl and the A-bomb and the flower, using completely different media, as Eli pointed out. And Some people in this room, including myself, are very aware that anti-Semitism was stoked by the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, you know, this fake book about how Jews are going to take over the world, and that was done with print media. And so the reason that I say that this whole debate might actually be considered harmful is that if you start your answer by saying, what we need to focus on is the very difficult and real problem of asserting actual provenance and systems of trust by distracting us by saying, oh, this media is different from that media, we're not even beginning to ask the really difficult questions we should be engaging with.
Can I
Yes,
speak to
please
that?
do.
So I feel like as somebody who's been in the policy sphere and the provenance sphere, governance sphere, and seeing that there is no appetite to talk about these things, there's a huge skepticism that as a society or a government or a commonality, we can even talk about these things. At some point, you might have to say stop. And I say this as a techno-optimist. I think our country, the world has gotten so much better off, in large part due to people's creativity and entrepreneurial fervor. But I think right now, a lot of work is being centralized. The control is centralized, and as opposed to it working for the little guy, it's working for the guy with political power or financial power. And so maybe the only way to get people's attention is just to yell stop. I don't think that will work. But maybe I'll get your attention to say, like, okay, we need, like, so when journalists, and when you use the example of the Daisy ad, there was disclosure of who paid for that ad. There had been debates, there were laws passed that said you had to make clear what was an ad and what was the program, what was news and what was editorial. Newspapers separate editorials from news. They have a masthead, they have bylines, they have common accepted practices about sourcing. So we've had debates and we've come up with these either private or public systems of trust, and we don't seem to be talking about that. So I think until we do, I'm scared about what the next development technology is going to do.
You have 1 minute to respond to that rebuttal.
Do you want to say it?
Sure, yeah. I mean, what's underneath this conversation is this a question of medium or is it a question of something else? And I think what we're arguing is all media have the potential to misrepresent truth. And it's not obvious to me that quote unquote synthetic media is I could argue that video and images are actually more likely to do that than something which is sort of synthesized because we place so much trust in what seems to be a photo or what seems to be, a objectively cut video. So I don't see why we would conclude that this is the right axis on which to say stop.
Okay, all right, I want to switch the kind of like conversation from what is synthetic media and what isn't, and let's go to the extremes where we're talking about it being used specifically taking one media and another and mixing it together, sort of this idea, as opposed to a more theoretical conversation that, all media is synthetic in some ways. Put that aside, let's go shorter term. Earlier this month, Facebook's Sheryl Sandberg told a Senate Intelligence Committee that deep fakes is a new area. I think she's referring to some of the same things. And to combat them, she said, it's a combination of investing in technology and investing in people. I don't know what that means. Do you agree with her? And if so, what kind of investment do you think she should be talking about? Where do we begin to sort of draw the line if you believe indeed that synthetic media is harmful?
I think that this gets exactly back to the definition. So for example, when you have the ability of what synthetic media is generative adversarial networks. So a specific kind of computer algorithm that is relatively new, making it unbelievably easy and soon to be frictionless to create forgeries. So what she's talking about is, if you want to combat that, it's just like hacking or cybersecurity, where right now it turns out that the fake Obama videos, fake forged Obama videos, not fake news, not forged Obama videos, you can create computer algorithms that can detect around the mouth whether this is actually computer generated or not. And that's going to keep going back and forth. And then I think that's in terms of what kinds of things you can invest in. The only thing to do, I would argue, is to invest in combating this, because the entire definition of synthetic media is generating forgeries. It's the ability of computers to do this thing. And so it's like saying, are there positive benefits to hacking? The definition of the thing is you're breaking into something new. The definition of the thing is you have to go back and forth.
Just to follow up on that, if I may, some would say that hacking is actually very productive in that it points out the flaws in technology. How do you?
That's, so hacking, let me think about that for a second. It's a metaphor. I think in a similar definition, there's a broad definition of hacking, which is like, I'm going to throw some stuff together, I'm going to hack this together, right? In the same way that there's a broad definition of what media is, like, oh, it was on the radio, right? But when we talk about synthetic media, we were talking about forging. So the analogy is having someone who did not give you the right to do this thing, to take their likeness and make them say something different, to generate something new that happened, is the equivalent of the black hat breaking into something that was not designed to be broken into.
Okay, so if we use that, the synthetic media as forgery, some maybe in the porno industry would say, yes, that's the point. It's to put people's faces into the movie, and that's what they're paying for. Why is that a bad thing? Is there a positive side to this idea? Just to spice it up a little bit. Is there a positive side to the good? That's what you're arguing, right? That the synthetic media can be indeed good.
Yeah, I mean, look, media, the more formats of media that we have, the more ways that humans have to express themselves. And in general, when we've offered humans ways to express themselves, sometimes they do really crappy things, but sometimes they make art, they find new formats of entertainment, they find new ways to communicate what they really believe. This is not unlike any other medium in that regard, and certainly when photography came along, people felt alarmed that it would capture people's souls or whatever it was, but we found, but it's been a benefit for us to be able to share images that way, and it's been, it's allowed a whole way of understanding the world that we didn't have before. I don't think there's any reason to suspect that this medium is unlike every other medium that has come to date. I mean, I would love to hear Matt talk about, you said this is a different from all other forms of technological media innovation. I don't really understand how it's different or more different than, for example, splicing together an audio tape to make a podcast when you're doing a much longer interview. That's a forgery of something as well, but we all kind of accept it because it does us a service to take out the ums and,
Can I address that specifically?
Please, yeah.
The editing is wonderful and lovely, and yes, editing has bad sides, but the advent of editing a podcast was, hey, we think there's something good here. It's a positive mission. We're going to help communicate. We're going to help do something that is on the benefit side of the scale. All of the research, all of the technology that is building synthetic media is designed to see whether we even can do this thing as an academic exercise. It is nothing. There already today only negative examples. Hey, I can synthesize someone's voice. Let me think if I can come up with anything positive, because the only obvious examples are negative. And that's why this is not a medium. This is a media type. And if podcast editing had been designed with the intent of creating fakes, and that was the only thing that anyone could think of, then maybe that would be negative. But that's not ever been the case until synthetic media.
I would also just add to that you have a whole different trust system, if you want to use that terminology, or policy framework. So in a podcast, there's an editor, if there's a publisher, you know who's responsible. You're either going to continue to sign up for that podcast or you're not. They're trying to get ad dollars. There's a whole system around it. Here we're talking about, a technique that's separated from anything like that, just like when you see this ad on the internet and you have no idea where it came from or how to hold somebody responsible, and they're only interest is in tricking you. It's not in getting you to come back, build loyalty, et cetera. So I think it's the context in which it's being brought up, and if we don't tether this technology to some context, that's where it can do harm.
So I completely agree with what Karen just said. And I think that the difference between what Karen said...
It's not that I'm competitive.
Between what Karen said and what Matt said is that I feel as though the reason to go back to older media is not, oh, everything is the same, but that humans don't change. People do things for good purposes, they do things for bad purposes. They do things just to fool around and kind of figure things out. Certainly, almost all of my students would argue that the character of Thanos in Infinity War is like, they're glad that they got to see that manipulated image, and it wasn't just someone fooling around or trying to like fool somebody. They enjoyed going to that Marvel universe, and that, by any reasonable definition, that's synthetic media. And so I do feel as though that we have had examples before of what Karen has talked about. We had the Hays Code when people didn't understand what is this talkie cinema stuff. We've had banned books through all of history in various societies, and sometimes people put the brakes on. And in the long run, I think Eli's point is well taken. In the long run, our ability to create and to bring good things into the world and to say, hey, we have to understand this new capability that we brought into the world, whatever this is going to be the thing that triumphs for any particular new capability. And I strongly disagree that you can categorize any technology, no matter what it is, as, oh, this is either people just fooling around or trying to do negative things. I don't think that's an accurate characterization.
Be able to, can I, because I'm not a book banner. So the only thing I would say about that is what we're arguing is that is more harm than good. We're not arguing like ban the technology. We're just saying that, and the piece of it that I'm arguing is that if I think we've entered into a phase where, for a variety of reasons, we don't seem to be able to act to mitigate harms in any kind of social way.
Okay, so on that
That's
note,
where
I want to ask my last question, and I would request that your responses be quite brief. We agree that there's a conversation that needs to be had with the public about this concept of synthetic media. How do we advance this conversation more urgently, but how do we do it in a productive way? Do we need to warn them about the dangers or promote the positive side of the innovation? Because we do see that there are two sides to this.
So I think that's what I'm getting at, which is that this is an opportunity to go back to basics on how do we understand truth in media? And that's the big question that I think both we need regulation about, but if people don't on a broad level, know how to think about truth in media, then we have a problem no matter which mediums are available. And it's a hard question, and it's an interesting question, but that's the conversation that we need to be having.
Anybody else want to?
So I think it is undeniable that as this inevitably continues, we're going to, sort of this category multiplied by the distribution networks, it is likely that we will move from being, I've heard it said, default trusting to default skeptical. We're going to start out, and I think that if we layer the solutions on in that frame, then that will, the easier we can make it for people to start out default skeptical and verify veracity through all the things that a number of people have said in here, that to me is the frame that will help make this not negative.
Anybody else?
I think we should always, and not just in 2018, but always in the past and always in the future, frame everything not in terms of the particular flavor of the month of what's the new technology, but frame it in terms of the need, as Eli says, for civic discourse and civic education. And you cannot have a real representative free society, you can't have a democracy if people don't know what's real. And knowing what's real is not a problem that we can pan off to, oh, it's the technology. It's something we have to take responsibility for in the way we create systems of provenance, even if, as Karen points out, that's very difficult and there is no appetite for it, it must be done.
Karen, do you want to have the last word? We got 30 seconds. That necklace is driving me bananas.
Sorry.
Thank you. We're recording this for my podcast. That's the other reason. And of course, I'll be editing it.
Please
so.
edit it.
So that comment won't go in there.
Synthetic.
I think we've entered into a moment in time for various economic reasons and social reasons where the individual can't take care of himself. He doesn't have the power. He doesn't have the economic power. He's not being given the tools. And so I think with that imbalance and with the total lack of transparency, it's very hard to put on the individual. You just need to become more literate. I think what you wind up with, which is what Matt said, which is just a complete inability, is what we'll either wind up with people more willing to believe what their tribe believes or unwilling to believe anything, and both of those are societally very dangerous.
Okay, so that concludes the debate portion of the debate. So you guys take the next minute, if you would, to prepare your closing statement. Each of our panelists will have 1 minute to argue for or against the proposition, which, audience, this is your fun part, right? Think about it. The proposition is synthetic media will do more good than harm. You have heard Eli argue that creepiness could be our salvation, he said. We allowed ourselves to believe that images captured reality, and actually all media is kind of synthetic. This is just the latest. You heard Matt say the harm is in the unintended consequences of synthetic media, because synthetic media is different. There is no larger mission to it. There is an inherent desire to deceive with it. You heard Ken saying, depending on what year you're in, that defines what the word synthetic even means, right? The only thing that matters is provenance, the author being able to verify who or where the media comes from. And then you heard Karen say that the system of debating the merits of tech is broken in and of itself, that synthetic media is due to the micro-targeting and the automated dissemination of all of this media. We are at a point where the consumer, the user, the citizen is in no position to be able to protect their interests. Okay. That give you guys enough time?
Yeah, I think so.
My vamping? Let's do closing arguments. Let's go in the same order that we delivered the opening. So Eli? You have 1 minute.
All right, so 3 points here. One is I just want to strongly suggest that disinformation is concerning, but not a problem that is medium dependent. And if we try to solve it that way, we're actually going to miss the need to solve for much more messy, but much more important issues that are happening when things are technically true, when they're in words, when they're in non-doctored images. That's where disinformation is happening in our society, not with synthetic media. The second is that what we need is to reestablish, there was an essay, I think it was Barth's, the author is dead in the 1970s, and we need to kind of bring the author back, that we can't divorce media from who made it, and that actually we now have the technological systems to integrate those two concepts in a much better way and make them more visible than they were in the past. And the last is just that humans do amazing things when they're given new tools. And I think there's a famous, Kranzberg's first law of technology. Technologies are not good or bad, nor are they neutral. And so this affords people an opportunity to speak in different ways. It affords people who may not present in a certain way on video to present in a different way. There are all sorts of things that people will do with this technology that we don't know yet. And we should be excited about that at the same time that we solve the problems, which are media independent.
Eli Pariser and Matt Hartman.
So I agree that disinformation isn't limited to synthetic media, but this debate is. And the discussion has been about what to do about the harm. That's what we've just had a whole long conversation about. But the question of the debate is, will synthetic media do more good than harm? And there's some good on one side and there's some harm on the other side. We heard a whole bunch of examples of the harm that it might do. And we heard some examples of the good. The good Ken mentioned was that there's a character called Fanis in Infinity War. That seems good. Sometimes people make art, Eli said. And I bet there are a whole bunch of other really nice to haves. But we've also seen on the harmful side today, not theoretical examples, but things that threaten our democracy, that threaten international diplomacy. And with specifically synthetic media, we've seen how it can totally change how people make decisions. So today, we're arguing that the good that is undeniably there does not outweigh the negatives that we see today.
Ken Perlin.
Well, first of all, very quickly to dispatch what Matt said. So all of civilization is worth preserving. Hamlet, King Lear, Casablanca, and Citizen Kane, all of the various ways that in various eras we use whatever is the current synthetic media, which will keep changing. It's not just about Thanos and Marvel characters. That was one example among why are we here? Why are we humans? Why aren't we just still in the cave eating mastodon meat? But I thought that Karen's points were actually really, really worth rebutting in depth.
Unlike mine.
Because she said that we're basically, no disrespect,
I'm just kidding.
Matt. No, because she said that we're just naked individuals. We're powerless. People are lost. And we can't be trusted to be an informed democracy. We have to put the brakes on everything. But because it comes down to sourcing, to trust systems, to establishing real provenance, where do things come from, and these are hard problems, we aren't just individuals. We're also communities. We have educators. We have all the people in this room here. We have community leaders and organizers. There are people who, if they understand that this is the problem to be tackled, will make sure that everybody isn't just left to fend for themselves and their homestead with their shotgun. We can get together and work together as a society to try to establish some truth and rationality so that we can continue to create things as artists and as creators of civilization and be the best version of us that we can be.
So I completely endorse the spirit of what Ken is saying, but unfortunately he's quite naive. So sorry. What's different is not the technology. I'll cede to you that a lot of what's new is not the technology, but what is new, I think, is the shift in the power. It's not that humans as individuals don't have the capacity to judge between different kinds of technology. It's that they're not being given, they're being tricked, as Matt said. And we're not creating, it is very hard to force upon the delivery systems that bring this technology to us, the kind of disclosure and information that people need. And what we're already seeing is unprecedented drift away from truth. And without truth, truth is critical to democracy. It's critical to creating, advancements in the civilization that you and we love so much. So it's not that we're saying burn the books or that individuals can't be trusted. I think what we're saying is that if you're going to introduce a kind of media that is going to purposefully create inaccuracies and or creativity, you need to be able to do it you need to be able to mitigate the harms. And if you're not going to mitigate the harms, and we all acknowledge that there are harms, then we conclude that the harms will outweigh the good.
Okay, audience, you've heard both sides. I want you to take the next 30 seconds to put aside, the laughs, the tears. I'll put it all aside and just think about what the proposition is, right? The proposition is synthetic media will do more good than harm. Do you agree that synthetic media will do more good than harm? Or do you disagree? So we'll start by asking those of you who agree, who are for the proposition that synthetic media will do more good than harm, to raise your hands. No. That is a lot of people.
That's like 5 of them, I think.
Is that synthetic media right there?
Exactly.
Who's to know?
All right, thank you. Lower your hands. Those of you who are against the proposition, please raise your hands. Wait, what? You all raised your hands both. I know this is a tough debate, but you got to choose a side. Can you tell?
I think they have a
Did
slight
they?
edge.
Okay, you know what? It's a podcast, so I'm gonna do it by clapping. Those of you who are for the proposition, please clap if you believe synthetic media will do more good than harm. Woo! Okay, those of you who are against the proposition. You guys, that's perfect. You just demonstrated how, I think you won, but you demonstrated how close it is, right? And why we need to bring this conversation to more consumers, to more citizens, and to talk about the very nuanced and complex issues that can come up with all of this new technology. Are we so lucky to have these four to do it with us today? Yes. So please do listen to an edited synthetic version of this on my podcast, Zigzag, coming out for season 2 in October. We look at technology, ethics. There's a little blockchain and female empowerment in there too, and it's a good time. So I hope you'll join me. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Well
you.
done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to our debaters. Give them a round of applause. Yeah, thank you.